Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is my review of the Silencerco Spectre 9mm suppressor. As you guys know, I am pretty much 100% Patreon exclusive, so if you're interested in seeing more than one video a month here on YouTube, you can go over to patreon.com, check out Sage Dynamics, and become a supporter. I would definitely appreciate it if you did. You'll see all of the videos over there, and videos you'll never see here. Now, without further ado, let's get to that review. A tiny little guy. You guys may know this, you may not. My go-to 9mm can for years now has been the Omega 9K. Don't get me wrong, there's other great 9mm cans out there, but that has been a favorite of mine. And I think what really appealed to me about that suppressor was the increased diameter versus other comparable cans in that same length. So you're getting a short K-length suppressor, which is all I really need, honestly. I just want hearing safe for however many rounds I can get away with. But I want a shorter can, especially on handguns. The longer you go, the more cumbersome it gets. It can cause cycling issues with certain guns. So the Omega 9K was always kind of my go-to suppressor. And then when Silencerco told me that they're going to be releasing kind of a predecessor, or not necessarily a replacement, but a replacement, an improvement on the idea of a K-length, do-all, hard-use 9mm suppressor, I was intrigued. And direct quote from people at Silencerco, this was going to shit all over the Omega 9K. And I'm like, well, that's a tall hill to climb, so I'm super interested in getting my hands on one. Lucky enough, the Silencerco sent this out to me, so for full disclosure, didn't buy it. They did send it to me for the review purposes. But as they know, and as you guys know, you pays you money, it takes you chances. Just because you get something for free doesn't mean you're going to be, well, you're going to lie about its performance. First thing about this suppressor that aggravated the holy hell out of me is it's not compatible with the legacy attachments that work on my Omega 9Ks, because I have two of those. So I couldn't grab my Omega 9K booster assembly and put it into the Spectre, and I didn't really care for that. And as I'm digging through my toy box of suppressor parts and boosters and accessories and spacers and thread adapters and everything, couldn't find anything that worked except for one alpha piston assembly. So it comes with a piston assembly, but it doesn't come with a piston, so you're not getting your 1/2x28 or anything like that. So that was a little bit aggravating, but luckily I did have one that would work, so I could use it on handguns and obviously throw a spacer in there or a direct thread and use it on other calibers. So if you are going to get one, you got to get the new alpha accessories in order to mount it. You're looking at a 3.9 ounce multi-caliber suppressor with an overall length of 4.76 inches, which is pretty reasonable. It's on the face of it, it's kind of like, this thing's going to have everything that I want, and then we'll go downrange and see how it performs. Another cool thing about it, obviously it's 9mm and 300 black. Those are the two calibers that they're really focused on, which are the two calibers that I mostly shot through it during the review process. Usually with these shorter K cans, it's going to be rated for 300 black subsonic only. They're going to tell you not to put supersonic on it or through it. The interesting thing about the Spectre is it's rated for subsonic 300 black full auto, but it's also rated for supersonic 300 black semi-auto. Pretty interesting. You don't really see that, especially out of a can this small, and I'm sure they tested that, but of course I'm going to test it too. Of course, it is a sealed suppressor, so there's no final takedown available to the user, which you usually don't see, but you see it a little bit with 9mm or larger cans. Cans beyond 22. A lot of the 22 cans you can take them apart because of the lead-only ammunition that you commonly see in 22. Not so much the case with the Spectre. You really notice the weight on this thing, or I should say the lack of it. So first thing I did was start running it on various handguns, and some handguns are more finicky than others. My go-to platform for suppressed handgun shooting is the FN509 MRD because it cycles everything, every can, every round you're going to put in it, no problems at all. Also threw it on a couple other guns just to kind of get a general footprint of the performance. The only thing that really happened that kind of aggravated me, and I'm starting to think, I've got a theory about this, that it's kind of length dependent. The shorter the suppressor, the more likely it is to happen. And that's based on, years and years and years of suppressor shooting. But no matter how hand tight I got it, and again, bullet spin plus thread righty tighty, lefty loosey, right? So that's a factor as well. no matter how tight I got it, after 20, 30 rounds, the can would start to loosen up. So it's something you definitely have to watch for on pistols, because that's a good way to get a baffle strike. If it comes loose 3 or 4 or 5 threads, it can start to get a little wonky, and then you end up having to do a warranty claim. But I will say, shooting on various handguns, 9mm, both 115, 124, 147, subsonic, and I shot some 124 plus P through it as well, just for S&Gs. Performance was fantastic, except for loosening. One of the things you can do to overcome that is graphite tape or plumber's tape. Do a quick wrap on your threads, then put your suppressor on. That can get a little annoying. If it's a suppressor, you're going to move from gun to gun to gun to gun to gun. But if it's going to live on a gun, predominantly, graphite tape's recommended. I would recommend it for pretty much any suppressor. You don't have to use much, because you don't want it to get involved in the internal bafflings of the suppressor. You don't put too much on there that it actually gets inside the barrel, inside the can. You have to take a little bit of patience to apply it. But as far as handguns go, performance was fantastic. And then, of course, I'm going to move it on to submachine guns. Now, I was not able to find a 3-lug mount for the suppressor from Silencerco, but I did have a Gemtech that was thread compatible, so I threw that on there, and it got plenty of time, select fire, full auto, semi-auto, on my MP5 and my MP5K. And this is kind of where I get into the tone of things. On a handgun, you're so close to the mechanisms and the action, you don't really get an appreciation for the tone, I think, as well as you do when you get it a little bit farther away from the shooter's ear and you hear less of the operation of the firearm. That's being very semantic, but to me, it matters. The K is a very fast gun. That bolt doesn't have to travel much at all in order to cycle. So the cyclic rate on the K is generally higher than what you'd find on a larger or more traditional size MP5. So shooting supers and subs through this thing, semi-auto and full auto on the K and on my quote-unquote full-size MP5, tone was fantastic, cycling was reliable, no related issues whatsoever there. Of course, that's not the only submachine guns I'm going to throw it on. I threw it on quite a few throughout the review process, getting me up to that 2,000 rounds, and overall, tone performance is fantastic, especially when going direct thread. I think that there's some harmonic things that happen when you start adding more adapters. Direct thread is very simple, and I do enjoy direct thread for, say, 300 black, which is what I did. And I have a Sons of Liberty 9-inch 300 black, which I shot super and subsonic through. Really ran this thing as hard as I reasonably could. I wanted to have more nitpicky things to say, I guess, you know, especially, and I don't do it on purpose, but it does happen where I'm a little bit harder on things that I get for free, even though I put, you know, almost 2 times the value of this suppressor, the MSRP of the suppressor, through it in ammunition. And I don't have to worry about you guys getting nitpicky about that, but the general public generally will. They generally are, and they should be, honestly. A little bit more skeptical of reviews where the reviewer got things for free. So I try to be a little bit, I don't want to say, I don't go out of my way to be harder on it, but I'm going to run the volume higher, and I'm going to spend more time on the envelope of performance. So 300 black is something I put quite a bit of 300 black through the suppressor. I think overall, I put 650 rounds between 300 super and subsonic through the suppressor, through that 9-inch Sons of Liberty. And performance is fantastic. Now, another thing, it doesn't really set the suppressor apart, but it is nice, is the diameter is only 1.3 inches. 1.5, you wouldn't think that 0.2 would matter, but it does on a lot of different suppressors. And I think part of that is the materials they use for the suppressor. They're using grade 5 and grade 9 titanium. And of course, for modularity on the suppressor, you've got all the alpha mounts you can use. You can, you know, on a PCC, you can go with an ASR style mount with the alpha size, or you can piston with a spacer or 3-lug adapter, which is pretty common for most suppressors. The problem is it doesn't have that quote-unquote hub compatibility that you see with some of the smaller pistol suppressors, where you can get away with multiple manufacturers' accessories. Generally with rifle-size suppressors, hub is kind of the compatibility that we see across the board. With pistol suppressors, we don't necessarily see that as much. But it's just, it shouldn't perform as well as it does, given its size. And it confounds me a little bit that I was able to see significant improvement. And I don't generally do comparisons. In fact, I really don't do them at all. But I did my own personal comparison just because I happen to have my Omega 9K on the range when I had this on the range, shooting them on the same gun. And there's a difference. It's not remarkable, but it is noticeable. And I think that's a huge factor when you're changing the size profile between suppressors. Granted, different materials. And that really kind of shows me how materials matter. And titanium is one of those materials that either it's lauded or it's pooed on, depending on the opinion of the person or their own personal experience. And we've definitely seen in the earlier days of suppressors where titanium was more of a gimmick, quote unquote, than it was a superior material for the suppressor, because titanium is notoriously hard to weld, and there's some other factors involved, and then there's quality and brittleness and heating and thermal transfer and all these other factors that come in. So maybe the jury's still out on titanium for larger calibers, rifle calibers, but for pistol calibers, it's fantastic. Another cool thing about this is muzzle signature was non-existent. And I was expecting, like you'd get with a lot of titanium suppressors, that initial sparking. You get sometimes, you see it more in rifle cans, but you'll have the suppressor will spark during its report for the first 100, 150 to 500 rounds. I didn't have any noticeable sparking through the suppressor from the shooter's perspective. And the tone attenuation to the ear, shooter's ear, which is what I'm worried about. I don't care what other people think. Some cans are measured from, spectator's perspective and the shooter's ear. Some are measured from the shooter's ear. The tone is, well, it's as good, if not better. Really, it's noticeably, just a little bit noticeably better than what I'm getting from the Omega 9K. Smaller size profile. One bad thing about the K, of course, is that the increased diameter does block some suppressor height sights. You may have to go a little bit taller on some guns, some optics. It can be in the window a little bit more than it should be. Now, as far as your average muzzle report, they're claiming 137.7 decibels on 9mm and 133.3 on subsonic 300 black. I, as you guys know, don't really have any way to measure that. You're going to have to check out Pew Science or one of the other guys that uses decibel meters. But I will say, from the shooter's ear, my perspective, it's a quiet little can. And literally, that's a correct sentence, because it's a tiny little guy. And you start to see 22 suppressors in this size profile, the bigger ones. Instead, this is a very tiny, very lithe, petite 9mm suppressor that I'm really impressed with. I don't know if I'm going to get rid of my Omega 9Ks, but I'm not going to use them as much anymore, because this thing is fantastic. Especially now with tax stamp returns coming back so quickly, the price is pretty reasonable for what you're getting. You're getting a lot of performance out of the suppressor that I honestly would have expected to pay more for. And the overall size profile, especially as a direct thread, this is something I could easily see, especially because it can handle 300 subsonic, even though I don't shoot that as much as I do subsonic. If you are in a 300 black aficionado, you could direct thread this on the gun, and that's your muzzle device, and you're good to go. And it's not going to add a significant amount of weight, because a lot of times with those 300 blacks, you go 7-inch, 6-inch, or maybe even 9-inch, but then you add a rifle-size suppressor to the end, which may not be long, but it's heavy or heavier, so it kind of throws off your game a little bit. This little guy on the end of that 9-inch Suns didn't even really notice it was there, and it just runs. Mounted on various submachine guns, my Flux Raider. It just fills every category I would want a 9mm suppressor to fill, and I don't have to worry about K length adjustment. It's not a full-size can, quote-unquote, that I then have to take some of the baffles off to get this size profile, because I'll be honest, any kind of modular can like that, I usually take off those baffles and they go in a box, and they never come back out again. So the suppressor will get worn in and those baffles will stay pristine, because unless I use them in a review, they're never going to get shot, because you can only get so quiet anyway. So usually those modular accessories or modular baffles you can add on those cans will only give you another 2 or 3 decibel reduction, if that. So to me, it's never been worth it. And I think Silencerco kind of had that same mentality when they were coming up with this, and I can tell they spent some time working on this suppressor. Outside of its performance, it's kind of just, there's nothing dramatically different from the appearance of the suppressor. Of course, you can't get in there and see the baffle stack and how they designed that, but the overall performance of the suppressor is very easy to detect just by shooting it. So my advice, if you're interested in another 9mm suppressor or your first 9mm suppressor, this might be the only one you ever need. Honestly, especially since it's, rated for super 300 black, and of course 9mm and subsonic and intermediate calibers in between, 350 Legend and so on. I can't really think of a reason why you would go with a different suppressor. There's other good 9mm suppressors out there, but not in this size profile, this performance, this sound, this decibel reduction, and this reliability. Till next time, Patreons, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, train accordingly.